These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. German political activists stand facing a cellar wall with hands raised during a mass arrest in Berlin on 6 March 1933, just days after the new rulers took power. Within weeks, places like this began to fill with thousands of opponents as a single-party state was built in silence. In 1950, Soviet stunt rider Pyotr Mayatsky patented the Sphere of Courage, a double metal mesh bowl where he rode his motorcycle along the vertical walls. During the huge blizzard in Iran in February 1972, snow buried cars and homes under up to 8 meters of snow, cutting whole towns off from the world. When the snow finally melted, more than 4,000 lives were lost, and some villages simply vanished from the map. At the start of the 20th century, Romanian forensic doctor Nicolae Minovici ran controlled experiments on himself to study what people feel when the neck is suddenly compressed. He later wrote that after only a few seconds, he heard a loud rushing sound, his eyes filled with tears. During unrest in Berlin in 1919, fighters crouched behind huge rolls of newsprint, turning a printing house into a fortress. The scene later became a symbol of how an independent press can shield people in times of chaos. In 1916, American inventor Albert Pratt patented a bizarre combat helmet with a built-in rifle barrel, letting a soldier aim and fire just by turning his head. The idea promised hands-free shooting, but recoil, weight, and safety fears kept this strange helmet stuck in the patent archives. In 1956, in the United States, cameras were allowed to film a man strapped into an electric chair for the first time. The quiet room and the heavy equipment show how far a modern state was ready to go in the name of its harshest punishment. In 1976, at the Montreal Olympics, Japanese player Sachio Yamamoto had to guard Soviet star Uljana Semjonova, who was about 210 centimeters tall. The Soviet team won every game, and many rivals said that getting past Semjonova's long arms felt almost impossible. In July 1956, the Italian ocean liner Andrea Doria rolled onto her side and sank after a night collision with the smaller ship Stockholm, despite advanced radar and an unsinkable design. In the United States, during the 1920s Prohibition era, some women earned money as secret suppliers with bottles hidden inside special belts and coats. This flapper opens her coat in a busy bar to reveal a portable minibar on her waist. In Algiers in 1974, a hand-painted street sign warns that short skirts, shorts, and even pet cats are not welcome past this passage. Beneath it, a woman wrapped head to toe in a white hake walks quietly by. On 21 April 1978, a Korean Airlines Boeing 707, off course on a Paris to Seoul flight, was damaged after crossing into restricted airspace and had to land on the frozen surface of Lake Korpijärvi in Karelia. The jet slid to a stop in deep snow with more than 100 people on board. During the Second World War, German engineers tested a giant whirlwind cannon that shot donut-shaped air blasts into the sky, hoping to flip enemy planes out of their flight path. In real trials, it was almost impossible to aim and far too weak. German aircraft sometimes dropped metal containers like this one, packed not with food or shells, but with Iron Cross medals for frontline soldiers. By the time these symbols of honor were raining down instead of real supplies, it quietly showed how badly the war was already turning against them. On the set of the 1957 film The Monster That Challenged the World, a young girl poses inside the arms of a huge creature prop. Its glassy eyes and heavy rubber claws look nightmarish. But just outside the frame, the crew is calmly building movie magic. For 7 years, from 2005 to 2012, Australia's most wanted fugitive Malcolm Naden hid inside a zoo, sleeping near animals and stealing their food. Keepers began to notice missing supplies and an unknown man using the staff house. In the 1930s, Chicago crime boss Al Capone bought Meadowmore Dairies and used his old delivery trucks to flood the city with bottled milk. Legend says he pushed for clear date stamps on every bottle after his own family got sick from spoiled milk. In the 1960s, German engineers tested this strange open-frame rig as a flying stand for the vertical takeoff strike jet. Packed with small lift engines and pipes, it hovered only a few meters above the ground before the ambitious project was finally canceled. In 1974, stunt performer Dar Robertson jumped from a 7th-floor window to test a new inflatable safety bag for fire rescues. As crowds watched from the snow-covered street, his calm fall onto the giant cushion proved people could escape heights that once seemed impossible. French infantrymen pose in heavy test body armor at Fort Peene around 1915, the plates scarred by practice rounds to show where they held and where they bent. Early vests like these were so heavy that soldiers could not march far in them. On the 1st May 1918 in Petrograd, a demonstration flight ended with this fragile plane parked halfway through a city roof. Photographer Victor Bulla captured the moment when early aviation met hard brick in the middle of a holiday show. In 1887, the Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev went up in this huge tethered balloon by engineer Henry Gifford in Paris to study the upper air. The gas giant rose above the Louvre Square like a slow science experiment hanging over the city. These leather shoes from the 9th century were found on the famous Oseberg Viking ship burial in southern Norway. They are sized and shaped so well that they still look ready for a long sea voyage on a wooden dragon ship. In Korea in 1951, American soldiers casually light their cigarettes from the glowing barrel of a Browning M2 machine gun. For a moment, the weapon turns into a campfire, showing how fast frontline danger could slide into dark humor. On 22 September 1939 in Brest, German General Heinz Guderian formally handed the captured city over to Soviet commander Semyon Krivoshein. Their brief ceremony on the platform showed a rare public moment of cooperation between the two armies as they divided Poland that autumn. In 1942 in the United States, curious customers bent over coin-operated peep machines to watch short, cheeky cartoon reels with titles like Back to Nature and A Timely Warning, before home television and the Internet. In 1899, paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn posed beside these giant dinosaur legs like a tailor-fitting suits for vanished giants. A few years later, he would study more bones and give the name Tyrannosaurus rex, meaning Tyrant Lizard King, to the most famous of them all. In 1945, with Berlin in ruins, crowds of civilians climbed onto every roof and step of this train to get out of the broken city. Many carried only a small bag and did not even know in which zone or country they would wake up the next day. In a ruined German village in 1945, a United States soldier stands back and tugs a wire to see if an abandoned rocket launcher is wired to a hidden charge. Clearing each suspicious object like this often took longer than the fighting. In 1927 in Leningrad, a Soviet doctor leads a group session using suggestion therapy to help men give up strong drink. Clinics like this tried to fight mass problem drinking with willpower and ritual instead of medicine or prison. In 1925, this small tractor with heavy chain treads crawled through city streets, one of the early machines built just to bite into packed snow. Before fleets of modern plows, a single noisy rig like this could decide whether a winter downtown moved or froze in place. In 1903, in rural France, some shepherds lived in tiny wooden houses on wheels so they could follow their flocks from field to field. This rolling hut held a bed, tools, and dogs under one roof. In 1930s Finland, new mothers with low incomes received this baby box packed with clothes, bedding, soap, and basic supplies. The sturdy cardboard box itself was designed to serve as the newborn's very first crib, a simple idea that helped lower infant deaths across the country. Around 1915, mechanics built this rocking wooden rig so trainee air gunners could practice handling a machine gun while the aircraft pitched and rolled. One man fires while another rocks the beam up and down, turning a muddy field into a very early flight simulator. In September 1939, near Malawa in northern Poland, a Polish and a German infantryman wrestle for a rifle in the smoke of one of the first battles of the Second World War. For a brief moment, the clash of whole armies shrinks to a silent duel on a muddy field. On 19 December 1972, in the Pacific Ocean, a helicopter from the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga hovered over the floating Apollo 17 capsule to collect the last crew of the moon landings. In 1941, two Soviet soldiers in white winter suits aim a Degtyaryov PTRD single-shot anti-tank rifle from a snow trench. This long, simple weapon could punch through early enemy armor with one powerful shot, at the cost of brutal recoil to its crew. On 23 September 1952 in Philadelphia, challenger Rocky Marciano traded heavy punches with champion Jersey Joe Walcott in the fight of the year. In the 13th round, Marciano's famous right hand ended the contest and began his reign as heavyweight champion. In June 1929, the Italian light cruiser Alberico da Barbiano lay on the stocks at the Ansaldo shipyard in Genoa, just a long steel skeleton of frames and scaffolding. Within a few years, this quiet factory scene would become a fast warship roaming the Mediterranean before vanishing in a night battle. In 1936, Chicago tried to solve crowded streets with this vertical parking tower, stacking cars in the sky like books on a shelf. Drivers left their vehicles at the base, and an elevator system lifted them into open slots high above the sidewalk. In 1992, in Tirana, Albania, buses leaned on their springs as people clung to every doorway and window because private cars had been rare for decades. When the old system collapsed, these rusty city buses briefly became symbols of a country rushing into a new and chaotic era. In the 1960s, American toy catalogs proudly sold full battle sets for boys, complete with plastic bazookas, grenades, helmets, and machetes. For a few dollars and a mail order form, a kid could turn the backyard into his own make-believe war zone. In 1936, American skydiver Clem Sohn showed off his homemade wingsuit at an air show in Hanworth, England, planning to glide from 6,000 meters before opening his parachute near the ground. This Soviet ZIL 29061 screw vehicle was built to crawl over deep snow and swamp to reach landed space crews in places where normal trucks would sink. Only about 20 of these Bluebird rescue machines were made between 1980 and 1991. In 1942, in the Smolensk region, German troops ride in open cars turned into moving forts, guns pointed at the forests where partisan fighters might strike. Even with sandbags and helmets, many such guarded trains were later hit in the silent rail war along these tracks. In 1957, in Toccoa, Georgia, strongman Paul Anderson raised an incredible 2,844 kilograms on his back, just enough to clear the wooden stands. This backlift is still cited as the heaviest weight ever lifted by a single person in recorded history. Parisians sleep shoulder to shoulder on the platform of Lamarck-Caulaincourt Station while planes pass overhead in the night around 1943 or 1944. Photographer Robert Doisneau turned this deep-tiled tunnel into a calm portrait of a city hiding underground to stay safe. Russian-born engineer Vladimir Zworykin stands beside early camera and display tubes, the glass organs that made electronic television possible. After leaving his homeland in 1919, he carried these ideas to the United States and helped shape the future of broadcasting. In 1968, Spanish factory workers staged a silent protest during their lunch break by standing motionless facing a wall, skirting a strict ban on strikes under Francisco Franco. To passers-by, it looked like a strange ritual, but every turn back was a quiet sign of defiance. Around 1919 in the United States, radio pioneer Alfred Graebe tested one of the first car radios, forcing him to string a huge clothesline-style antenna over the roof. A few years later, companies like Motorola would shrink this wild experiment into the sleek factory radios drivers now take for granted. In 1922, in Kiel, Germany, engineers tested this huge experimental diving suit with jointed metal arms and legs. It looked like an early robot from a dream, but it moved so poorly underwater that it became a curious side road in deep-sea technology. During the Prohibition years in the United States, small backyard stills like this turned sugar and grain into secret liquor. These two men pose proudly with their homemade bottling setup, treating the hidden trade almost like a family business portrait. During the Second World War, U.S. Navy blimps like these lifted off from Moffett Field to hunt enemy submarines along the coasts. Slow but tireless, they could hover for hours over a single patch of ocean, turning quiet gray waves into a watched zone. In 1827, English chemist John Walker created the first friction matches but refused to patent them, so he gained neither fame nor money. Businessman Samuel Jones copied the idea, gave the matches a catchy new name, and sold them by the ton. In 1938, Soviet engineers built the twin-hull hydroplaning catamaran OSGA-25 Express, a sleek passenger ship whose salons and deck looked more like a future ocean liner than a coastal ferry. It sped from Sochi to Sukhumi in about 2.5 hours, but after only one full season in service, the coming war took its engines. In 1929, Los Angeles, this roving bank teller truck drove through neighborhoods so customers could deposit or withdraw cash without ever entering a branch. Long before plastic cards and ATMs, your local bank could literally pull up to the curb. On 22 June 1978, Marine reservists practiced a beach landing at Coronado, while one relaxed sunbather refused to move from his chair. The contrast between rifles in the sand and his calm sunglasses stare makes the whole drill look like a strange summer postcard. British sailors aboard destroyer HMS Ashanti form a human chain to carry a long belt of 40mm rounds for the ship's anti-aircraft guns at Scapa Flow. In late 1941, the curved ribbon of metal almost looks festive, until you remember it is meant to light up the night sky against incoming planes. In 1918, volunteers built a tower of donated books outside the New York Public Library, stacking thousands of volumes on the steps. Many of these books and magazines were rushed overseas to brighten long hospital nights for wounded soldiers and nurses. In 1944, over the Philippines, Japanese officer turned informant Minoru Wada peers from a U.S. bomber as he guides the formation toward his former Army's headquarters. His secret cooperation helped the crews hit a key command center with uncanny precision. On the deck lift of aircraft carrier HMS Eagle in March 1956, sailors posed beside one day's food for the crew, about half a ton of meat, nearly 3 tons of vegetables, and a full ton of bread. In the middle sits a single barrel holding the crew's traditional rum ration. In 1915, British engineers tested this bizarre Sizer-Berwick windwagon, an armored car pushed by a full airplane engine and propeller bolted to the back. It was fast on open ground, but deafening, dangerous, and impossible to sneak anywhere. In pre-war experiments, Japanese troops covered ordinary bicycles with crude sheet metal shells, turning them into tiny rolling bike tanks. They looked fierce in parades, but in real rough terrain, these wobbling metal boxes were more comic than combat-ready. A German pilot stands wired into an experimental electrically heated flight suit during the First World War, trying to stay warm in open cockpit cold at high altitude. The tangle of glowing cables turned his clothes into a wearable radiator long before modern thermal gear existed. Inside an American RB-36 reconnaissance aircraft in the early 1950s, a photo operator locks a giant camera into the belly hatch before a high-altitude mission. These cameras were so powerful they could capture sharp images of whole coastal regions from far above the clouds. In 1943, at the Glenn L. Martin plant in Baltimore, a PBM 3D flying boat sits on the ramp with its engines hidden inside tall rolling sheds. These odd houses on wings let mechanics service the engines in rain or snow without stopping production. In 1956, a wall of police tries to hold back a packed alley of screaming fans, all reaching for a glimpse or autograph from Elvis Presley. The faces in the crowd show how rock and roll turned a young singer into a living storm of teenage emotion. Inside the bomb bay of a British Avro Lancaster, a small camera looks past rows of bombs to record every drop. When these cameras were added in summer 1941, they exposed a harsh truth. Only about 10% of the bombs that crews reported as hits were really on target. Laid out on the ground is the standard kit of a Second World War American paratrooper, from rifle, helmet, rope, and gas mask to small comfort items packed in the pouches. Before every jump, all of this weight had to be strapped to one person, who then stepped into the dark sky from an open door. An inventor rolls down the street in a homemade Birdman flying machine, its fabric wings stretched wider than the building entrance behind him. Crowds at early air shows loved these dreamers, even when their strange contraptions barely left the ground. The crew of a Handley Page Halifax from No. 158 Squadron pose calmly inside a huge tear in their bomber's fuselage after making it home. The gap shows exactly where flak ripped through the aircraft, missing them by barely a step in any direction. Women at the Leningrad Mint sort freshly struck for the Defense of Leningrad medals in January 1943, while the city is still encircled and freezing. Even as shells fall outside, they quietly prepare awards for hundreds of thousands of future survivors of the siege. Professor Howard Christie tests his towering one-wheeled machine in an Ohio workshop in 1920, sitting at the center like a pilot in a spinning cage. The experimental monowheel promised futuristic travel, but its size and tricky balance kept it as a bold engineering curiosity. Two volcanologists in 1933 climbed Stromboli in bizarre steel torpedo suits, designed to shield them from flying rocks and scorching ash. Their sci-fi look on the moon-like slope made many believe they were testing prototypes for future space explorers. U.S. Army flamethrower troops turned a New Orleans night sky into towering fire columns during the Army War Show in 1942. This traveling spectacle raised money and recruits for a nation racing to arm itself in World War II. A U.S. Air Force C-119 flying boxcar snatches a falling Corona spy satellite film capsule out of the sky above the Pacific in 1960. For years, the world never knew that American cargo planes were literally fishing top-secret photos from space with hooks and winches. Tour de France champion Ottavio Bottecchia blasts pressurized mineral water into his eyes to wash away dust on the 1925 race. Early sports photographers loved this shot because it showed just how rough and exhausting the Grand Boucle really was. Flames consumed the synagogue in Bielefeld as Nazi mobs torched Jewish houses of worship during Kristallnacht, 10 November 1938. The burning dome lit up the night sky, a public warning of the terror that was about to engulf Germany's Jews. Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of an independent Congo, sits bound under guard after being overthrown in 1960. Within weeks, he would vanish into secret custody, becoming one of the Cold War's most haunting political disappearances. On 14 August 1936, about 20,000 people crowded into Owensboro, Kentucky, to watch 26-year-old Rainey Bethea climb the gallows in what became the last public execution in the United States. The uproar over this carnival-like spectacle pushed authorities to move all future hangings permanently behind prison walls. Doctors at a hospital in the town of Budyonnovsk quietly write their names on their white coats during a tense hostage crisis in Russia in June 1995. They hope that if they do not survive the coming storm, someone will still know who they were and how they stood at their posts. In this photo, rural men stand in line for what they are told is free medical care as part of the Tuskegee study in Alabama in the 1930s. For 40 years, officials watched their untreated illness slowly progress while telling them they were being helped. German racial researcher Eva Justin measures the head of a German woman of Roma origin for a so-called race study in 1933. Data from such studies was later used to justify racist policies and camp deportations under the Nazi regime. This broken carriage is all that remained after an attacker threw a bomb at the vehicle of Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich in Moscow on 17 February 1905. The blast removed one of the most powerful men in the Russian Empire and pushed the country closer to the waves of unrest that soon reshaped its history. Soldiers hand out bread to Armenian refugees who have lost their homes in the Ottoman Empire around 1915. The campaign against the Armenian population led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and later courts named several officials as main organizers of the violence. This huge hall is Yale University Commons in New Haven during a banquet for the class of 1902. The new dining hall could seat more than 2,000 people at once, so graduation looked like a city of tables under one roof. This aerial view of St. Petersburg was taken from a balloon at a height of 800 meters by Officer A.M. Kovanko on 18 May 1886. It is known as the first experiment in aerial photography in Russia. Crew members of a German A-7V tank pose in front of their armored vehicle in 1918. Germany built only about 20 of these heavy tanks, so each crew fought in one of the rarest machines of the First World War. German prisoners of war read in a barrack at Camp Blanding in Florida in June 1943. The United States held about 378,000 German prisoners in total, around 10,000 of them in 25 camps across Florida, where many were used as farm labor to cover wartime shortages. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev tries on a new gas mask model while showing it to Cuban leader Fidel Castro in Moscow in 1963. Their smiling meeting came less than a year after their countries stood together in the famous Caribbean crisis. In 1968, Mexican runner Enriqueta Basilio became the first woman in history to light the Olympic flame. Her climb up the steps in the Mexico City Stadium turned the opening ceremony into a symbol of change in world sport. These are komuso, or monks of emptiness, from the Fuke Zen school in Japan in 1887, playing bamboo shakuhachi flutes as a form of breathing meditation. Their reed basket hoods, called tengai, hid the face to erase the self and gave them rare permission to move freely through Edo, Japan. Soviet and American sailors share drinks on a pier as they celebrate the surrender of Japan in 1945. For a brief moment, crews from opposite sides of the world stood together as allies at the end of the Second World War. Soviet-made missiles roll through Havana in a parade in 1963, 1 year after the famous Caribbean crisis put Cuba at the center of world tension. The show of hardware signaled that the island remained heavily armed and closely tied to Moscow during the Cold War. The airship Graf Zeppelin flies over Ulm-Münster in Germany in 1930. Built in 1928, it made a famous round-the-world flight, completed almost 600 journeys with about 13,000 passengers, and was later scrapped after the Hindenburg disaster ended the airship era. These workers stand at the entrance to a coal mine in the western Ta-Chu Range in China in 1905. Mines like this were dug by hand in remote mountains to feed the fast-growing demand for fuel in railways and factories. These are mannequins set up outside Las Vegas in 1953 for an atomic test, dressed and seated like a normal American family. After the blast, scientists studied how heat and shock waves damaged the figures, their clothes, and nearby houses. This is a giant saguaro cactus, a Carnegie that can live more than 150 years and reach about 12 meters in height. The strange fan-shaped crown is a rare crested form where the growing tip folds and creates a huge living water tower in the desert. A Soviet soldier in winter gear knocks down a German road sign with his gun during the January Thunder Offensive in the Leningrad region in January 1944. This operation completed the final lifting of the siege of Leningrad. A British marksman in a training school in France shows how he hides in the field while wearing a captured German camouflage smock. Allied troops sometimes reused enemy gear like this because its pattern blended especially well with European hedgerows and fields. German prisoners of war march in a long column down Moskovsky Prospect in Leningrad in 1944. After the siege was broken, Soviet offensives captured thousands of enemy soldiers like these and pushed the front line far away from the city. A French Saint-Chamond tank rumbles through a town street in 1918, showing its long, overhanging hull and boxy armor. About 400 of these early heavy tanks were built, and their poor trench crossing taught designers hard lessons for the next generation of armored vehicles. Soldiers of a British Indian Mountain Artillery unit in Burma study a Thompson submachine gun in 1941. The American-made weapon, famous for its high rate of fire, was just starting to appear in Allied units on this front. In October 1941, Emperor Hirohito asked War Minister Hideki Tojo, seen in the white uniform, to form this new Japanese cabinet. Weeks later, this government approved the attack on Pearl Harbor, and after the war, Tojo was convicted by an international tribunal. Mentawai women on Sumatra have their front teeth filed into sharp points as part of an initiation ritual. Specialists chip the tooth edges with a stone blade and hammer until the smile looks like small shark teeth, which is seen as a mark of beauty. Writer William Burroughs stands in a Mexico City police station in 1951 after a shooting incident that caused the death of his wife, Joan Vollmer. He was charged with manslaughter, released under unclear circumstances, and later said this tragedy drove him to write. Barrage balloons float over Britain during the Second World War, hanging on steel cables to force enemy bombers to fly higher and lose accuracy. Locals joked that with so many American supplies arriving, the only thing keeping the island from sinking were these balloons holding it up. Charles Earl Bowles, known as Black Bart, was a British-born stagecoach robber who operated in California and Oregon in the 1870s and 1880s. He became a legend as a strangely polite outlaw who never fired his gun and sometimes left rhymed notes at the scene of his crimes. Gas welding training course in the Russian Empire, early 20th century. Mastering this new technique let factories join metal faster and stronger than traditional riveting. Winston Churchill tests an American M1 carbine near Salisbury in Britain on 23 March 1944. Even as Prime Minister, he liked to personally try new Allied weapons supplied under Lend-Lease. Soviet partisans pose with captured weapons, including a Degtyaryov light machine gun in the front. The fighter beside the woman wears what appears to be a German police-style tunic, stripped of its eagle badge and reused in the Forest War. A handler sleeps curled up in his dog's pen at a British show on 7 February 1970. At big events like this, some owners stay right in the stall to keep their dogs calm while waiting for the judges. Makeup artists press latex ape prosthetics onto an actor's face during the filming of Planet of the Apes in 1968. Each mask took several hours to apply and helped the movie win a special Oscar for its groundbreaking creature makeup. Japanese-American families line up under guard to board trains to wartime relocation camps in the United States in 1942. Around 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were removed from the West Coast, most of them American citizens later formally apologized to by the U.S. government. Cars stretch for miles as fans park along the roads near Duke University Stadium in North Carolina in November 1939. The scene shows how college football was already drawing crowds huge enough to overflow the city's streets before the era of modern parking lots. An American M67 tank in Vietnam fires its flame projector into the hills to clear hidden positions. This vehicle was a modified M48 Patton that replaced the main gun with a flame weapon and carried fuel tanks inside the hull. Soviet nuclear submarine K-19 moves through rough seas as it returns to base after a fire on board on 24 February 1972. The accident killed 28 crew members, and this view was captured on 1 March by a British Nimrod patrol aircraft following its slow way home. The Casio brothers stand with their Model 14A calculators in Tokyo in 1957, the first fully electric compact calculator sold by Casio. Each machine weighed about 140 kilograms, used relay technology, and cost 485,000 yen. Mounted police drive back Chinese and Vietnamese students protesting outside the United States Embassy on Novinsky Boulevard in Moscow in 1965. The demonstration was against American actions in Vietnam, but Soviet authorities still broke it up despite officially supporting the same side. Crowds gather around the wreck of a derailed steam train near Lacon, Texas, in 1893. Wood for the locomotives lies stacked in front as townspeople and railroad men inspect the jammed engines without any modern rescue gear. A woman with two girls looks at the ruins of their home in the Soviet Union on 1 September 1943. Many villages on the Eastern Front were left like this after months of fighting and burning retreats, turning families into refugees overnight. Berlin introduces separate lanes for cars, bicycles, and pedestrians in 1935. This kind of divided road design was meant to cut accidents as traffic in the city grew faster and heavier. A man mows his field while the oil refinery at Pančevo, Serbia burns in 1999. The huge black clouds came from wartime airstrikes that filled the sky with smoke for days as people tried to keep working. A woman sits on what is left of her apartment floor in Berlin in 1945 after bombing tore away the outer walls. Among the exposed bricks and broken beams, she still keeps a table and flower pots as if the room were intact. Rows of cod lie spread on wooden racks to dry in the open air at Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1906. This kind of sun-dried fish was a major export, keeping New England fishing fleets busy for months. Soldiers and nurses join a tug-of-war game used to measure how hard people pull when they work in teams in the 1920s. Researchers found that as more people grabbed the rope, each person pulled less on average, a pattern now called the Ringelmann effect. A 76mm anti-aircraft gun stands on the boat crane pedestal of the battleship USS Texas in 1916. Texas was the first American battleship fitted with dedicated anti-aircraft artillery. Soviet crews fired DSK heavy machine guns mounted on Ford GPA amphibious cars to cover a river crossing on the First Belarusian Front in 1944. The small Fords, supplied under Lend-Lease, turned into floating gun platforms that could drive straight from road to water with the infantry. American women in 1944 donated worn silk and nylon stockings so they could be turned into powder bags for artillery. With hosiery scarce, many then painted seams down their bare legs as a patriotic fashion substitute. The U.S. Navy LCAC-10 hovercraft rides on a giant wheeled transporter at Little Creek, Virginia, in 1988. These air cushion craft can carry tanks or trucks straight from a ship onto a beach or flat shore without needing a harbor. Researchers at Ellis Research Laboratory in 1957 test a motorcycle helmet by dropping a steel ball onto it while a volunteer wears it. These impact trials helped create early safety standards that later became compulsory for riders. 2 German prisoners of war wear handmade clown costumes for a theater show in a French camp during the First World War. Such performances were organized to keep hundreds of captured soldiers busy and to stop boredom from breaking their morale. American bank robber Pretty Boy Floyd, later labeled Public Enemy No. 1 by the FBI, appears here in a police mugshot. In the early 1930s, his gang robbed dozens of banks and often burned mortgage records before Floyd was shot dead by law officers. 3 Moroccan women wear full-length hake veils in 1971 with only a small mesh opening to see through. In these years, many women in the cities were already changing to modern clothing, so photos like this show a tradition close to disappearing. Young women on the Long Branch Promenade celebrate the news of Japan's surrender in 1945. With the Second World War finally over, even playful stunts like lifting a friend by her legs became part of the street party. In 1951, Swedish farmer Gustaf Stålfarfar Håkansson, age 66, and denied entry to a 2,000-kilometer race, started unofficially with a homemade number 0. Riding almost without sleep, he finished a full day ahead of the official winner and became a national legend who kept cycling into his 90s. Chinese soldiers ride in an American Douglas transport plane over India in 1942 as part of the lift of Chinese Expeditionary Force units out of Burma. They were flown to Indian bases on orders from Chinese and Allied commanders to rest, rearm, and train for later operations back into Burma. The fallen spire of St. Nicholas Church in Tallinn hangs from its tower after the fire of 13 October 1982. The blaze badly damaged the medieval church, which was later restored and turned into a museum and concert hall. Marilyn Monroe sits in a car wiping away tears on the day her divorce from Joe DiMaggio is finalized in 1954. DiMaggio never remarried and for 20 years had fresh roses delivered to her grave 3 times a week. A New York firefighter opens a street hydrant in 1908 using a model introduced in 1904. Early hydrants like this helped the city cut the risk of huge fires that had destroyed whole blocks in the 19th century. A liquefied natural gas tank failure in Cleveland on 20 October 1944 sent a fireball through the East Ohio Gas Company plant and nearby streets. The blast and fire destroyed much of the surrounding neighborhood and caused many casualties, leading to major changes in gas storage safety rules. Queen Elizabeth II dances with Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah during her visit to Accra in 1961. For many viewers, this image became a symbol of a changing British Empire as a reigning monarch publicly showed equality and friendship with a recently independent African leader. A gunner climbs a narrow ladder to the upper wing gun position of a giant German Zeppelin stock and bomber in the First World War. These huge night bombers carried several open air gun nests like this, leaving crews exposed to wind and enemy fire high above the front. An Italian soldier on the Eastern Front trudges through the Stalingrad winter in makeshift straw boots, facing temperatures near -30. Many of his comrades suffered severe frostbite here, and some later told how Soviet field hospitals and young nurses saved their legs and their lives. An American serviceman shows 2 burst barrels from captured 20mm Japanese Type 98 anti-aircraft guns, torn open by extreme pressure and heat. Such failures came from firing long bursts with faulty ammo, turning the weapon itself into a dangerous piece of scrap. British engineers test the experimental A4 Vickers amphibious tank in the 1930s, using huge inflatable pontoons for buoyancy and an outboard motor for water movement. The odd design never went into mass production, but it helped the Army study how to make later floating armor workable. Japanese-American soldiers of the 402nd Regimental Combat Team stand on the European front in the Second World War. This unit became the most highly decorated in U.S. Army history per soldier, even while many of their families were confined in camps back home. Greek soldiers pose with a suspected spy captured near Mount Athos in 1913, recorded on an early color autochrome plate. The scene shows how quickly new color photography began documenting real intelligence work on the eve of the First World War. Engineer M.A. Legsdine examines an 18th century wooden water pipe section dug up during sewer works on Zvenigorodskaya Street in Leningrad, 1941. In many Russian cities, the first water systems were built from hollowed pine logs like this, and some lay forgotten underground for more than 200 years. This rare image shows Saartjie Baartman, called in Europe the Hottentot Venus, a woman from South Africa whose unusual body shape made her the center of paid stage shows in London and Paris in the early 1800s. This strange wooden fork from Siberia is the original "do not rush into danger" device behind the old saying. Hunters put bait on the high middle prong so a wild animal would reach up, slip a paw into the narrow gaps, and stay caught until they came. Irish-American engineer John Philip Holland sits in the tiny test hatch of one of his early submarines at the start of the 20th century. His compact gasoline and electric designs became the model for modern underwater boats used by navies all over the world. French stage legend Sarah Bernhardt stands in a rich fur coat among First World War soldiers in Paris in May 1916, already having lost her leg in an operation but refusing to leave the stage. Even with a wooden leg, she toured hospitals and front lines to perform for young men in uniform until her death in 1923. American soldiers inspect a German train loaded with V-2 rocket parts, still half hidden under branches, near the town of Bromskirchen in late March 1945. These captured missiles and their experts would soon help launch both American and Soviet rocket programs that reached space. American visitors inspect a small concrete bunker at a former Japanese factory in Mukden, Manchuria, in 1946, now covered with bold Russian writing left by Red Army soldiers. The text quotes medieval Prince Alexander Nevsky about defending Russian land and ends with the simple message, "Russians were here." Japanese ground crew use a hand pump and a barrel on wheels to refuel a Mitsubishi A6M50 fighter somewhere in the Pacific around the years 1943 to 1945. Even at advanced air bases, many frontline planes still relied on this slow, muscle-powered system to keep them in the air. A woman taxi driver in New York in 1925 leans in to start her car with a heavy hand crank while a crowd watches. For the perfect photo, she even placed her driver cap on the headlight, turning hard work into a small street performance. French soldiers demonstrate a strange trench catapult nicknamed the Grasshopper in 1915. This spring-powered launcher could toss small explosive charges in a high arc toward enemy lines long before modern mortars took over the job. On the 1922 set of Robin Hood, star Douglas Fairbanks and director Alan Dwan use a giant megaphone to shout instructions across the medieval fairground. Before radio headsets, this huge cone was the only way to control hundreds of costumed people at once. An Israeli fighter uses a Boys 13.2mm anti-tank rifle mounted on a Willys Jeep in the Negev Desert in 1948. These improvised desert vehicles gave the young Army mobile firepower against enemy armored cars and field positions. A 19th-century dentist calmly grips a pair of forceps while his patient leans back with her mouth open in a simple room around the years 1850 to 1860. Before modern pain relief, people often faced tooth pulling with only a drink of liquor and the hope that the dentist worked fast. Winston Churchill adjusts his cigar in front of BBC microphones just before a live radio speech in the 1940s. His evening talks went straight into living rooms across Britain and helped keep the island calm and determined during its hardest days. Before the era of Hello Girls, early telephone companies filled their switchboard rooms with young men like these, racing to plug cords and connect calls. Managers soon replaced them with women operators, believing they were more patient, calm, and polite with customers. A group of German doctors who treated Vladimir Lenin stand on a frozen red square in Moscow from 1923 to 1924. Their medical notes on his last illness were kept secret until at least 2024, fueling theories that he died from a strange and complex brain disease. Marlon Brando, in an ornate uniform costume, raises a glass with Marilyn Monroe at a Hollywood party around 1954. Two of the brightest stars of the silver screen share an easy toast between scenes. Japanese women stand with sashes and banners during a rare public protest over low pay in Japan around 1920. Many of these factory and office workers were earning only a fraction of men's wages, so they took the bold step of demanding fair treatment in the street. British troops lift a tangle of barbed wire to hold back Sinn Féin supporters during a protest in Dublin in the Irish War of Independence, as people shout from only a few steps away. The marchers are backing prisoners on hunger strike in Mountjoy Prison, a campaign that helped turn public feeling against British rule. An A-6 Intruder attack plane and an S-3 Viking patrol plane from the United States aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy sweep low over a Soviet Project 641 submarine in the Mediterranean Sea in 1987. Cold War pilots and submariners often played this tense cat-and-mouse game in open water, shadowing each other at very close range. American soldiers examine a captured German airdrop weapons container in Kornelimünster, Germany, in December 1944. The metal box had wheels, canvas handles, and a crushed nose to absorb the landing shock, so rifles and other gear reached the ground in working order. Army officers in Washington study a Ford Model T that has been turned into a strange track-laying all-terrain car in 1921. Designers hoped this cheap little machine could haul guns and supplies over mud and snow like a small tank. Two waist gunners stand at their Browning heavy machine guns inside a B-24 Liberator bomber, wearing helmets and early body armor. This aircraft carried up to 10 such guns, and more than 18,000 Liberators were built to fly in tight groups and cover each other from incoming fighters. During the First World War, British children played with this Red Cross Field Hospital set, complete with tiny cots, bandaged patients, and a nurse. Toys like this quietly taught kids about life at the front and encouraged families to support real medical aid. American war correspondents walk around the twisted frame of a giant German Me-323 Gigant transport plane on a Tunisian airfield in May 1943. The aircraft was one of the largest land-based transports of the Second World War, its fabric-covered body burning away and leaving only this metal skeleton. Two young women of London's anti-aircraft defenses adjust their dark glasses as they scan the sky through a heavy rangefinder in 1942. Their watchful eyes helped guide the city's guns toward incoming planes long before radar screens became common. In Paris in September 1963, cyclists pass under a big banner that reads, "Welcome Yuri Gagarin, first cosmonaut of the world." The city greets the quiet man who had already gone beyond the sky and changed how people saw the Earth. Three Tasmanian Aboriginal people pose in a studio in the mid-19th century, already survivors of a society broken by British settlement. Within a few decades, disease, forced removals, and government-backed bounties had cut their people from several thousand to just a few recorded individuals, including Truganini, often called the last of her community. A 16-year-old bride and her young husband in uniform pose for a wedding photo in Tokyo in 1939, dressed in plain, everyday clothes instead of silk. In a Japan ruled by the slogan, "Luxury is your enemy," even weddings were stripped down for the sake of the army, yet this quiet girl would live through the war and old age. Crowds in the Belgian town of Boring huddle under umbrellas in 1933, waiting by a school wall where local children said they saw Mary appear. For weeks people came in rain and cold, hoping to witness a sign in the same quiet corner.